Daniel, a brother overseas, welcome to the Potential is Human podcast, where I guess today we're going to be discussing truth and the differences of what that looks like for us as people or individual expressions. How are you? Tell us where you are and how your day has been so far.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I am based in Sydney, Australia, and today my day has been quite relaxing, actually. Usually I'm at my brother's bakery cafe, which he just recently opened, and that's pretty full on. Most of my time waking hours are spent there, but today I actually had a leadership workshop delivery. So when I have those, I stay at home and I facilitate those sessions. So can't complain. Got a little bit of a rest day in today. So feeling good, ready to have a nice chat with you about truth.
Let's do it. Before we dive into that, tell us what you do, Daniel. You have mentioned to me that you wear several hats. You briefly touched now on, leadership training and facilitating that. What does Daniel do and what does life look like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So over the last roughly at this point year, just under a year, I kind of had a bit of a rejig in what work looks like for me. So I used to be a full-time leadership consultant, and around this time last year, I decided to go do my yoga teacher training because that was something that my curiosity and interest led me to. And so I, for logistical reasons, resigned from the 9 to 5, went and did my yoga teacher training. That was a full 6 week program, if I remember right off the top of my head. Came back and didn't force myself to rush back into work because I think there's this real kind of fear or anxiety around not having a source of income, of needing to save up and build towards a potential future. But I recognize that that was a part of conditioning that I've grown up around, and I just said, hold on, let's step back and evaluate what I actually want to do, right? What brings energy to my days. And I knew that my brother was in the process of opening his bakery cafe. He makes croissants. So I decided to hold off and just, move to a contract basis with my old company to facilitate workshops. So that's the first thing that I do is leadership workshop training and facilitation. And I do that on an ad hoc basis, depending on when workshops are scheduled in with the organization. And then most of my time is, as I've already mentioned, spent supporting my brother at his bakery cafe. I'm the front of house guy, the guy at the till who greets everyone who comes in, try to give them the best possible experience, create as welcoming of an environment as possible. A lot of fun. Didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I actually do. And then the third hat that I wear is, as I've touched on, yoga teacher, teaching yoga. And that's something I do on a very ad hoc basis at the moment. The other two take up most of my time. So this one is just covers here and there. Going to start teaching weekly in the very near future. But those are the three hats that I wear.
That sounds fantastic. I love that you can be in leadership training, but also, be front of house, making sure that you're greeting people and people are getting delicious croissants. Like you literally lit up when you said that to me. So how is your brother's cafe doing? And, how is it being supporting him in that process?
Yeah. It's been really awesome to see the shop come to life. He had been selling direct to his customers by delivering on weekends at first and working a 9 to 5. And then he started getting booked out far in advance on weekends. So he moved that to full-time weekdays and weekends. That started getting booked out. So he was like, well, maybe it's time to explore opening a shop. And I think what excites me most about it, or what I enjoy most about it, is kind of what I touched on. Is it's almost like every customer that comes through the door is a friend, right? And there's this openness that we can bring to the shop to make sure that people have as enjoyable and welcoming of an experience as possible. And as best as we can do that, I think lot of people can probably resonate with the fact that when you're at work, you kind of feel like you put a certain guise on, you put a mask on, you show up as your work self. Um, and what I've fundamentally discovered through working at the shop is in hospitality, all you have to do is just make people happy experience, right? Like is create that welcoming environment. And that's definitely the most enjoyable aspect, is just continually doing that, even for the short 30-45 second interaction, because for that period of time we're friends. And I think it's something beautiful that I didn't really recognize about working in hospitality before.
Mm-hmm. There's certainly an openness in the way you express yourself. And later in the conversation, we'll touch on how, I came across you online and some of the writing that you share. Was it always like this for you, Daniel? I know you've done the inner work. I know you've been on the path, but growing up, if I'm correct, was Australia, and then moving to China, and then studying in the US. This kind essence of Daniel, was it always this way, or have you found more of that as you've done the work?
It's definitely not always this way. I think we all grow up with a certain set of conditioning that's passed down to us, and in some sense, the maturation process is becoming aware of that conditioning and recognizing that's not you. But growing up, I was never really. I was open and curious, but not to the degree that I would say that I am now, right? I was always interested in different perspectives, particularly because of that international background, I would say, right? When you're constantly moving around, being exposed to new cultures, and especially going to international schools, you would travel to other international schools and be exposed to just all of these different ways that people can live and relate with each other. And I think that naturally lends itself to a certain openness inherently, that international lifestyle, especially moving to the US as well, starting fresh there. Um, all of that lends itself to a bit more of an open, let's say, attitude to life. But that is not to say that I did not have my own particular set of conditioning, especially coming from a Chinese background, with immigrant parents, like that. I think a lot of Asian Americans, Australian Asians, they can all relate to a certain set of what that looks like growing up. So it's definitely been a process of dissolving the beliefs that I once held about life was, and definitely has rapidly picked up more so in the last year and a half, when I became more interested in truth.
Mm-hmm. Out of curiosity, and if you would like to go there, I don't have any understanding of what Australian Asian or Asian American experience must be like, right? And that conditioning in your own process, but also in terms of the way the world perceives you. What is that like for somebody who's maybe listening and can relate to what you're saying and wants to free themselves as well?
It's a good question. I would say that the primary set of conditioning that we experience is relatively similar. If we've grown up in a certain environment in which, our basic needs, financial, if all of the financial needs are taken care of growing up, the odds are that you face a certain attitude towards money, a certain relationship with money, right? And I would say that, especially in my family, I can only speak to my own experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that my parents, my dad especially, had a very poor upbringing. Didn't have much financial wealth in his family growing up, and so having lived that for himself, he wanted to ensure that his children didn't have to go through that, right? And so money has been a very, very big focus of what brings him happiness and joy and fulfillment. And so obviously that's a big part of just conditioning generally speaking. But I think in the Chinese mentality, it's always about that generational wealth, saving up and passing it down, and that's kind of how you approach life. Now, I would also say that, you know, the more I think about this as we're talking, the less it's clear to me that there's a certain set of Chinese American or Chinese Australian conditioning, and more so just human conditioning, right?
Mm-hmm.
This idea that, you know, our academic system is set up in a way that you get your good grades, then you go apply for those good schools, and then you get that good job, and so on and so forth. We all know the narrative. I think most of us who are listening will know that narrative. And, you know, there might be different flavors and textures of it throughout different cultures, but that seems to be a predominant piece of conditioning that we've inherited. And really, the fundamental question I think we have to ask ourselves is, what are we chasing, right? Like we think we want the money, we think we want the stability, we think we want the security. But if we're truly honest and open with ourselves, it comes back to, we're chasing happiness, right? If all of those things didn't, if we didn't believe that they came with the promise of happiness, we would shift our sights immediately. We'd be like, no, not worth it. So I didn't even answer your question, but basically that's to say is the, you know, there might be nuances in that Chinese American upbringing, but the conditioning is, I think most people will resonate with what I just said.
Yeah, thank you for being so open about it, because you have actually answered it in the sense that it's human conditioning. Because here's a South African white male who understands exactly what you've just expressed, right? In my own experience of the conditioning, because I love that you took it there. We all just want to be happy, and we are pursuing those things which we misperceive to be the answer to that lasting happiness. And you exhaust yourself. I've exhausted myself. I'm sure you're going to explain the experience for yourself as well. But someone listening may still need to chase. They might think like, what are these two guys talking about, right? And that's perfectly fine as well. In our understanding, at some point, we see very clearly that all we actually want is this promise of happiness, which does not exist outside of you in any people, places, experiences, or things, although we believe that they do. So when I hear just a brief background of your story, Daniel, you had an upbringing where clearly your father made sure that he would provide for you to the best of his ability and for the family. You had an education in the US, which a lot of people would not be able to have. Then what started to shift? Like, what did you actually study? Maybe I should ask you that question. What degree did you get?
Yeah, so I studied a dual major in neuroscience and computer science in the US. And when most people hear that, they're like, oh my God, he must be so smart. I'm like, no. If you knew me in college, that's not what you would think.
Yeah.
But I've always been fascinated by the sciences. And I think neuroscience, my now best friend was the one who introduced me to the realm of neuroscience. He was a neuroscience major himself, and he just talked a little bit about it, and that sparked a bit of my curiosity to check out what that was about. And the more I learned about the brain, the more fascinated I became by it. Mm-hmm. Now, I would say that the computer science side of things, don't need to go there. That was actually, no, it is actually very interesting. I think it's worth touching on. Now, I don't really care too much about the computer science side of things, but back then, what drew me to it was my introduction to computer science professor. And it wasn't the computer science itself that, you know, cultivated my interest in it. It was the fervor and the passion with which the professor taught the class that drew me to it, right? Um, and I think there's something to be said about really seeing somebody loving what they're doing. Like it's so evident when it comes through. It's the most exciting thing to watch someone just talk about something they're so passionate about, right? And so that's just a little tangent that popped up. But those are the two things that I studied in college.
When you reflect now on that passion that your professor or lecturer had, how do you see it now? Do you see it as like just life being expressed through him or her? Or do you see it as a skill set, or is it more just passion and inspiration flowing through the human?
Yeah. So there's definitely a degree to which teaching is a skill set, right? There's a pedagogical technique that like there are people who are passionate who are bad teachers, and there are people who aren't passionate who can be good teachers. But when the two meet, that's when the magic happens, right? And for him, I think he had cultivated his teaching capabilities already to a great degree, and combined with his passion for the topic, it really was just this. It was just joy expressing itself, right? It was love expressing itself, and for him that manifested as this love for the realm of computer science. And looking back on it, I wish I could go sit in that class again because it's just such a beautiful thing to watch.
Does he know the impact that he has had on your journey? Have you ever been able to express that to him?
So I haven't talked to him in recent years, but when I was taking his class, and when I went back to I took two of his classes during my time there, and I made sure that I let him know that his passion and love for the topic was a big part of what drew me into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's incredible how one person can have such a massive impact, and it stays with you, right? Even till now, and will going forward. So leaving college, what did it look like after that? Because now you have your degree, you still have your conditioning, and off you go into the world. What was that next step for you naturally?
Yeah. So for me, funnily enough, I never went and did an internship in the summer holidays of my college years. That seems to be a very common thing for people to do. I didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when I stepped foot into the corporate world, I very quickly realized that the 9 to 5 was not what I was looking for. Um, there, it was just an instant like I recognize that there's a practicality that I need to work a job and make money, but 9 to 5 working in corporate is not what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And so from the get-go, there was already this questioning of of this blueprint that was handed down, because my first job was stable, it was secure. I made enough money to get by and live comfortably and do the things that I wanted to do, but I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my life like that. And so while I couldn't immediately jump ship because I wanted to give myself at least a couple of months to really test the waters instead of make a rash decision, let's say, in the meantime, I became very invested in or interested, let's say, in the self-help space, the personal development space, right? Because if I couldn't control the things that were happening around me, my circumstances, then let's see how I can shift to the inner space. And that actually expressed itself in large part through this big interest that I cultivated in health, fitness, wellness, right? Um, and so I figured if I can't change what my job is, then let's see if I can set myself a goal, right? To get a six pack and get shredded and like get really healthy and strong. Um, and I think anybody who has experienced that for themselves might resonate with what I say next, in the sense that you can very, very, very quickly develop a toxic relationship with your body and with food when you go down that path. Um, because, again, the modern conventional perspective is you have to look a certain way before you can feel comfortable and confident in your own skin. And especially um, for males, there seems to be this belief that you got to you got to push numbers. You just got to keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So those two things combined together, this desire to just keep getting stronger and to look as lean as possible, um, created a pretty negative relationship with food for me. And the details I don't think are very important. It's more that, again, it goes back to, I thought that when I hit that number on the bar, or I thought that when I looked this certain way, that I could maybe stop trying to push myself to do more, to strive and achieve more. But that moment never came, right? So that's probably, let's say, one area of my life in that time where there was a lot of inner work and self-reflection. The second was, and very intricately tied to it, is if I can't quit my job just yet because I need the financial stability for practical reasons, can I explore different side projects, let's say, right? That did interest me. And so because of my interest in health, fitness, wellness, I started creating content around that area. And I did so for several years. But because, so this is something that I think is interesting to talk about. I'd love to hear your perspective on this. People talk about, people ask, what would you do if you didn't have to worry about money anymore, right? That's a very common question that we get asked when we're trying to figure out what our life purpose is, what gives us meaning. And for that period of time, I really enjoyed creating content and sharing those things, right? And I was doing it not getting paid. So to me, at that time, with my understanding, I thought that was the path, right? To do side projects that you enjoy doing, and fulfillment, and you'll find fulfillment in doing that. But surprise, surprise, I still didn't find fulfillment in doing that. And so, I've been talking a lot. I'm really curious to hear your perspective on kind of how that sits with you, how that resonates with you.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of similarities in our paths. So I totally understand, looking after the body and then almost that over-identification with the form, getting the six-pack, pushing the weights, increasing the numbers. I mean, there were days, I joke with my wife sometimes about it, where she would watch me go to the gym twice a day because just that regime and the strictness behind what I was doing. And, that was all part of the process. But as you say, it never brought that satisfaction. It was always about what's next, what's more. For me on the money journey, I worked really hard. I lived in Dubai for 5 years, and then I came back to South Africa. It was more of the same. I worked really hard. I put my head down, but it was the same pattern on repeat. It was working hard, having what you want, being able to provide for yourself, being able to have the fun you chose to have. But inwardly, I was in a state of inner turbulence. Somebody outside of me would be like, Ryan's an everyday guy and he's got what he wants and he's doing well. That wasn't the case internally, and that had to be faced. So I didn't really go down the exploratory part of, what would you do if you didn't have to worry about money? I was kind of thrown straight into, who is this one, or this idea of the lack of money, and who fears not having. And that was not easy in itself, because I started to see that it was a programming and a conditioning that I have been working on for many, many years and still do, around who is this identity and who is the one that is constantly worried about what he may have in the future. And I love that you have your own shade and texture of that as well, because just out of curiosity quickly here, was your father in corporate or was he more entrepreneurial?
He was in corporate, and he's worked at the same company for 20 some odd years at this point, I think.
Incredible.
So yeah, corporate.
So I can only imagine like the magnitude of what you said to us, right? So you get your degree, you walk into corporate, it's all you know because of your father's trajectory. Yet you also recognize that this is not for you. And then it's like, how many side hustles can you have? And how can you keep on making sure that provision comes in? How did that change? Because for me, it was more of a letting go of the need to make sure that I had and that I was fulfilling this emptiness called lack, just a total trust and seeing that that one who thinks it lacks doesn't and isn't there. So how has that unfolded for you? Because a great education, a father in corporate, your own opportunity to go into corporate, and now leadership training, supporting your brother's cafe and yoga is very different to what perhaps your family thought might be right for you, Daniel. And how did they receive that transformation of your own?
Yeah. So I'm very, very lucky to have parents who are very, very understanding and open. That's not to say that there weren't resistances every time I announced a horizontal jump in what I wanted to do. But at the end of the day, after we've talked things through, I know that they are always going to be there to support me, right? So I'm very blessed to have that set of circumstances, because I think that is how I stumbled upon truth. Um, because everything was already in place, and yet that internal sense of lack was still there.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so I guess that segues nicely into how how all of this unfolded over the last couple of years,
Yeah.
because similar to you, like on the outside, everything was there, and I think a lot of listeners can also agree that on the outside it might look like they have everything together, but on the inside there's this gnawing, gaping hole that just can't be filled no matter how much we do, right? And so, you know, for me, that pushed a lot of the things that I did. And it wasn't until the beginning of last year, February 2022, that I had a psychedelic experience in which the best way to put it is reality revealed itself, right? Um, in hindsight, when like reflecting back on that, it was this moment where it was just unperturbed peace. I very vividly remember the thought, thinking that everything is perfect until I identify back with this body mind.
Yeah. Mm.
And it was self-evident that this is what I had been chasing all of those years of pushing myself, of constantly trying to get somewhere. It wasn't it wasn't that I was trying to find fulfillment, let's say. Fulfillment wasn't something that I was going to find by pushing myself and achieving more. It was something that would naturally blossom forth when all desire to get somewhere else disappeared, right? And so that was let's say, the first glimpse of reality or of truth. And from then on, it's just been a um, constant examination of the beliefs that I carry, and the investigation of whether those are actually real or not. And the more light we bring to the darkness, let's say, the more layers of all of those beliefs fall away.
Mm-hmm. Was your psychedelic experience a once off, or was it something you did a couple of times to facilitate this understanding and seeing for yourself?
It was a once off, and in that once off event, it became evident to me that this is what life was about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That everything that all of the different paths, let's say, that we think we want to walk, all of the different journeys that we think we want to walk, they all bring us right back to the start. All brings us right back to the start of the journey.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said, because I think there's so many people who may hear our discussion that, you know, they're seeking and they're working hard and there's so much effort on the path, but what you're looking for is where you already are. And it sounds ridiculous when you say it in English language to other people, but when that realization happens, it is, in my experience to date, the most profound, beautiful, loving understanding and acceptance that can happen, because so much of that weight is let go of needing to achieve and get somewhere and become somebody. Because I was very much on that path, right? You were in your own way as well. And yet when we let go and we start to be free from that conditioning and bondage, life just becomes so much more effortless, one, but also beautiful in what it already is, not what we want to make out of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it can be put quite pragmatically and logically, right? Because we talked about it earlier. Everything that we think we want is actually a stepping stone to happiness, but we've never actually inquired into what happiness is, right? We take it for granted that it is this transient, fleeting experience in which there is a positive spike of emotion and that it's dependent on something happening. But when we actually examine all of the moments that we've been happy, all of the moments where peace has pervaded experience, the only common underlying thread that we can find in all of those is a complete non-resistance to what is, right? Because if happiness were dependent on achieving a certain set of objects, somebody would have found the recipe to happiness by now, I imagine. Somebody must have, just by pure probability alone. But when we really look at it, we realize that the only unifying thread is a non-resistance to what is. The only problem is that our conditioning, the upbringing that we were talking about earlier, you go to school in service of what? For them to get good grades. In service of what?
Yeah.
The next thing. It's always the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. We've been conditioned to believe that it resides at some point in the future when we've done enough. But that is fundamentally the self-perpetuating infinite treadmill that never ends, right? Because we all know from personal experience, the moment we've achieved the thing that we thought we wanted, we're happy. We can be at peace for a little bit, but then on to the next thing, right?
Yeah.
And it never ends. So instead of trying to fill that sense of lack by almost just it's blindly following the patterns that have been ingrained in us. It's very useful to step back and actually think, like, what is happiness? What is happiness? What is peace? And when we deeply understand that it is non-resistance to what is, then we can examine all of the resistances, because that's almost in some sense a direct path to happiness. It doesn't require you to fulfill a certain number of, you know, stepping stones or milestones in order to finally get there, but you recognize that it's always here, right? And it's just that you have all of these layers of armor that you've wrapped around, that you've wrapped around what you actually truly are, and you identify with all of these different complex layers. But fundamentally, if we want to discover what happiness truly is, there's nowhere to go, right? All we have to do is examine these beliefs with a fine-tooth comb and recognize that they're not what we truly are.
Mm,
right?
And of course, it takes courage to do that, and that's why there's people like yourself and others who can guide people to inquire around these beliefs and the layers of conditioning, because we're not sitting here by any means saying that this is just a walk in the park and it's easy. It's actually it can be quite frightening. It can be quite complicated at times. So yeah, it's gradual. And I do believe, if I just look at the journey that I've experienced, like, life's doing it for you, even if you consciously want to do it or not. It's always bringing you to the next experience to explore deeper, or experience challenge that may need to fully be met in order for you to realize something other than just the challenge, certainly in just the way it's unfolded for this body mind. And when you were talking about happiness, it's like I realized there that Ryan can't be happy. It's when there's no Ryan that happiness is, because Ryan and his conditioning and the idea of who he must be and what will happen to him if he is not, if lack is a reality, what's going to happen to my existence? Ryan is the one who wants to make sure that he is constantly striving and pursuing the next outcome. And it's coming to see and understand that no Ryan is happiness, which I guess we can relate to. I want to go into something you wrote so well, Daniel, when you had written to me, and it ties off what we're saying. You wrote, "For as long as your self-worth is built upon progress and achievement, you will never be fulfilled. You don't have to go anywhere. Simply sit in the fire of silence and let it burn your dead wood away. When you are left with nothing to hold, then fulfillment will find you." And that encapsulates exactly what we've just discussed. But yes, burning the dead wood away seems challenging.
Burning the dead wood away only seems challenging because we are misunderstanding what that entails, right?
Yeah.
Because what the ego wants is fundamentally to the ego is a conditioned set of patterns, right? That we then identify with, because through reference to memory, it happens all the time, and so it builds this seemingly continuous separate entity, this person that wakes up every day, goes about his or her daily activities, goes back to sleep, rests up, next day, repeat, rinse, repeat again. But when we this is a question that is quite commonly found in non-duality, is the question of who am I, right? Because what most of us do is we take ourself for granted, and we go through our entire lives without actually wondering, who truly am I at the deepest level, right? Because we know without a shred of doubt that I never change, right? I have always been me. Yet throughout our entire lives, our body is changing from the moment we're born, or at least from the moment we're born to when we grow up into our teenage years, into adult years, elderly. The body is constantly changing. Same thing with the mind. Mind is never static, right? Thoughts are constantly coming and going. Beliefs are changing. Attitudes, perspectives are shifting. So when the body and the mind, which we typically believe we are, is constantly changing, yet we deeply know that I myself have never changed. There's an incongruency there, right? And so when we try to, here, let me back up a bit. If we want to truly be happy, we have to understand what the source of the happiness is, right? And I had previously mentioned that happiness is the non-resistance to what is. And when we examine this belief that I myself am this person with desires and ambitions and goals and dreams, with it comes the flip side, the fears, the worries, the anxieties, right? And when we examine our experience with a fine-tooth comb, it's exactly as you said. In those moments of peace, happiness, joy, there's no time to think, oh, Ryan is happy, or oh, Daniel is having such a good time, right? There's just what is in front of you, and there's just happiness. It's only after, when you re-identify with the person, that you think, oh, I was happy back then, and this was caused by XYZ things. But I actually should preface this. When we talk about happiness, but I think happiness is actually quite a misunderstood phrase. So for the purposes of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to use the word peace instead.
Yeah,
we'll use peace.
I understand. Yeah.
When we talk about peace, what we're fundamentally talking about is the absence of worry, right? Because if we could live the rest of our lives without worrying about the future anymore, then we would be quite happy. We would have a very peaceful and happy life. And so then it's important to ask ourselves what the source of our worry is. Why do we worry? And as far as I can tell, worrying can only happen in relation to the future, right? It's that, or in reference to the past, but in reference to memory. Because in the past we've experienced this seemingly pleasurable event, and now we're not experiencing it. And then we can either think that what we have now is not good enough, or maybe in the future it'll get better, or maybe in the future something worse will come up. And so then we inquire into who it is that the worries are happening to, right? Because we think that there is a person who has these thoughts, and that this is, and that's why we're upset. But when we pay attention to our direct experience, what we realize is that there's just the thought, right? There's just the thought that of what's going to happen in the future, or you know, XYZ tragedies may happen. How do I avoid them? There's just thoughts.
Mm.
And when we try to find the person who is having those thoughts, we can't find the person, right? And so there's a very drastic shift in the relationship between what we consider to be I myself and the thinker, right? We realize that there is no thinker. There is no there is nobody there is no central command center that is I myself that is doing all of this, right? We are simply that which is aware of all of these appearances. And the more we sit in this fire of silence, the more we are aware of all of the different conditionings that are associated with it, all of the beliefs that we've wrapped into our experience, the more we allow everything to bubble up as they come without trying to push them away, the more we allow them in the welcoming space, their power to generate fear or discomfort or anxiety vanishes. And so it was a very roundabout way of saying that all of our fears come from a resistance to what is. And when we talk about meditation, we're not talking about sitting on a mat with your eyes closed and focusing on your breath. That can be a very useful tool, but it's almost a preparation for the ultimate meditation, which is simply being aware of what is without resistance. Because then all of the deep conditioning that's been rooted in the body and the mind can bubble up to the surface and evaporate into the air.
Mm. Thank you for taking us through that so effortlessly, because that is the seeing that needs to happen. And, when you said there is no thinker, maybe we can just zoom in on that slightly as well for somebody who might be curious. I saw that very clearly once. It was like thoughts happen almost automatically, right? And we can observe those thoughts or be aware of the thoughts. And if I did think that I was the thinker of these thoughts and all thoughts that I have, it would be like knowing exactly what my next thought was going to be and all possible options of thoughts, as if I was standing in a supermarket of thoughts and I could take total responsibility for choosing the very next one that I would choose to have versus all other options. And that's just not the case, right? What will my next thought be right now? I couldn't even tell you. And that's the insight. If somebody sees that momentarily with us here today, you will begin to see just how automatic thoughts are, and that you are that which is aware of the thoughts. Thoughts come and go, but as Daniel said, you've always remained. Me, myself, I have always been here. But the thought I had prior to your conversation with you today is not the thought that I'm having right now. So exploring these things for ourselves and doing it in your own pace and gentle approach is where the real transformation happens. So yeah, thank you again, Daniel, because you put it across so well. And my next thing I want to ask you is Technicolor Brain. So this is how I found Daniel on Instagram. What was the catalyst for starting a page which offers so much wisdom, understanding, but also the expression of yourself through those words?
So shortly after the psychedelic experience, I realized that I had never really had a creative outlet. And I felt that there was some sort of a channel that I needed to express that which was beautiful, right? And I had actually been writing for roughly, I had been practicing writing for about a year and a half ish, like writing content on health, fitness, wellness when I was interested in that. And so the natural channel, let's say, was to do something with words. And really there wasn't really an some big catalyst or impetus. It was literally just, well, I know that I can write, or at least I've been practicing writing. Let's see if I can string some words together that kind of celebrate my love and interest in this topic. And ever since I started writing those, I've never looked back. I've just enjoyed doing it, and it's kind of just carried its own momentum.
Mm-hmm. You know, as soon as I saw your writing and your posts, I knew, because it's not the writing, it's where you're writing from, and you're writing from that place which we've tried to point towards in our call, and we've come to know for ourselves. So your words carry that understanding and the essence of what is being expressed. How has it been received by others, by public? I mean, allowing yourself to now put your writing out. Have others noticed what your words are reflecting to them?
So I think the beauty of poetry, and I say this a lot to people who talk to me about it, is that I'm just putting words on paper. It's the reader who finds their own bit of magic in it,
Yeah.
right? And for people who are interested in truth, the perfume is evident, right? It's self-evident what it points to. For people who aren't interested in truth, it's perfectly fine. They find their own meaning in the words, right? And really, I don't write to try to, convert people, or to try to, tell people that they should be, that all of their efforts in what they're focused they're in what they're chasing are wasted, and they should just, go into non-duality. Um, I write as a celebration, right? I gain nothing from it other than the joy of writing. And whoever finds their own bit of magic in their words, all the better.
Mm-hmm. Your writing isn't then a means to an end, and I think that brings us back to how we can all choose to live life more, in the sense that you're doing it in your words as a celebration. You're not writing to get an outcome. You're not writing to convert. You're not writing for the audience to applaud you when you put your pen down or your pencil down, right? You're just writing as an expression of that which wants to be expressed. And that's what I believe we all need to learn in life on a deeper and deeper level, is to honor that, not to do so much and be so busy trying to obtain something in our doing, but rather to just be. Should we pull one up? Because there is one that I read in particular, and it
Yeah, of
reads,
course.
peace that can be taken by external circumstances is not truly peace. Similarly, love that can be taken by the departure of a person is not truly love. I get it. Is there anything you would like to say around that? Your own words?
It goes back to what you were saying about that line on fulfillment, right? For as long as you, I can't remember verbatim exactly, even though they're my own words, but it's something along the lines of, for as long as you look for fulfillment and achievement in gaining and striving, you're never going to find it, because that attitude is built upon a misunderstanding of what peace, happiness, and fulfillment are. And similarly, I think love especially is a whole nother topic, but we have been misguided, I think, largely in part by, movies and that entire realm of our culture, where love is portrayed as this really romantic, um, this romantic relationship that happens between people. But but with our understanding, we understand that love does not happen between two people. It's the absence of the other, right?
Yeah.
It is when it's when the walls dissolve and beyond becomes within. And in that space, when all is within you, there can be nothing but love, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here's another thought that is a bit of a tangent, but still related. The peace that we're looking for, we think we will find it when we have achieved enough, right? This fulfillment we think will come when we have found our life purpose and have done enough things, set enough external circumstances in place. That's never going to come, because fulfillment isn't the end point of, it's not the end point and product of a certain set of doings. Fulfillment finds you when you stop trying to get somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And this is why the inner work is all about being aware of all of the different conditionings that we have, because the primary conditioning is that we always have to do something. It's always a trying to escape the now. And so when you open when you allow all of that dead wood to slip off of yourself, what you find is the peace that you're looking for.
That was always with you, but you had to look for a while.
You just it was always chasing you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was always chasing you. You were just too busy trying to look for something else, trying to distract yourself with this arbitrary set of targets and goals that you've set for yourself, when the thing that you've wanted most, it's like you're looking here and it's right behind you coming for you, but you're not staying here letting it find you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm not sure of the exact story, and I'm just going to paraphrase it completely in my own words, but there's a gentleman who has a dream in his house that there's a treasure buried across the world underneath somebody else's house. So he goes on the journey to go and get his treasure. When he knocks on the door across the world, another gentleman opens the door and says, "Hi, how can I help you?" And he says, "I had a dream that there's a treasure buried underneath your house." And the gentleman responds and says, "That's very interesting. Last night I had a dream that there was a treasure buried under your house across the world," pointing towards the treasure is where you are, right? And yeah, I totally honor you, Daniel, for what you're sharing with the world, for who you are, for the way it's so uniquely expressed through you. Thank you. And for the opportunity to have a discussion today. It was such an effortless, just a knowing and an agreement that two of us were going to connect and do this thing called podcasting on Zoom. And if anybody has really resonated with your words today and may want to get in touch, how can they follow you? How can they come into contact with you? And what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So first, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. It's been a joy to just kind of roll with whatever the topic is, not have any sort of constraints, and just have a good chat. So thank you for that, Ryan. And best place to find me is, as you've already mentioned, on my poetry Instagram. at Technicolor Brain. Now that's LOUR for Australian spelling, because American spelling is LOR. But yeah, if anyone's interested, you can read my poetry there, or also send me a message, and I'm happy to have a chat there.
Fantastic. Daniel, until next time, thank you so much and take care of yourself. I wish you the absolute best.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. You too.